Hi, I'm Tova Larson. I work for Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. I have been with WSPS for 10 years. It was 10 years on Monday. And in those 10 years, I've trained more than 12,000 certified members of joint health and safety committees. But I started my career not as a health and safety professional, I started my career as a laboratory chemist. And I got into health and safety because I crushed my right foot working in a welding shop. I'm not going to get into that story, but I am going to tell you that I am absolutely passionate not only about safety, but about chemical safety. OC disease has such an incredible disease burden here in the province of Ontario that we really want to be on the prevention side of safety as well, but of OC disease. And it's one of those things where folks might you use some solvent maybe without gloves, and you think to yourself, well, nothing bad happened today. That was a freebie. There are no freebies with chemicals. So that's why I do what I do. That's why I love what I do. I used to work in super molecular medical nanotech. So I spent the early part of my career developing drug patch technologies using nanotubes. So I'm actually a materials chemist, but now I'm a safety professional. And a base node one. Over to Tony.
Okay, thanks, Tova. And good morning, everyone. So glad you could all make the session today. And I really hope you can take away some great information to prevent the injuries and illnesses that can happen when working with chemicals. And I joined WSPS over 25 years ago now. I was a health and safety consultant, and I got into this career because I was thank you. I was a co-op student at the University of Waterloo, and I had the opportunity to work in a few different health and safety departments in various employers. And just this whole concept of prevention really resonated with me because my father was a welder. And I grew up as his sidekick. And if anything would have happened to him at work, it really would have been just devastating to me and my family. So that's sort of the passion I bring, is wanting to make sure everybody's mom and dad or daughter, son, everyone goes home safe at the end of the day. So I used to do a whole bunch of JHSC training, WHMIS training, hazard assessments. But in 2019, I was pretty excited. I got my CIH designation. So now I am on the OC hygiene team, specialized consultant. There's about 10 of us across Ontario, and we provide the hygiene services. So if you need anybody to do the air testing, the chemical exposure assessments, we can come in and do that. Help with respirator protection, program development, fit testing, those kinds of things. So that's sort of where I spend most of my time now. So I'll start with our first poll question. I'm confident we know every single chemical that's found on site. So that poll question, I think, should be popping up. There we go. And you just need to click what you think. Yes, no, maybe, and click submit. And we'll be able to see them starting to flow in here. Confident you know every single chemical on site. Okay, so thank you for being honest. About over half of us not confident, and that's quite typical, right? Some places have a lot. And, have we done a good job at making sure we have a good up-to-date inventory and understand what's coming in and what's not, and having control of that? So thank you for participating in that. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we go. Another poll question. The MLI-TSD has a special enforcement campaign underway now about chemicals. What do you think? True? False? Not at this time? They only focus on safety, not chemicals? Or not sure? What do you think? I think, do we see them coming in, responses? Oh, yeah, I can True. Yes, 75% of us are thinking true. And that is the right answer. They absolutely have an enforcement campaign, occupational hygiene specific campaign. And we're going to talk about that. It's running for a second year now. It did start the previous year and they are continuing it. And now we've got a chat question. So please put in the chat, what's your biggest challenge with chemicals in your workplace? Tova and I would love to know what's on your mind. What's your biggest challenge?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Disposal.
See them coming in.
Oh, it's such a great topic. And not to poach one of the slides coming up, but when is the cheapest time to dispose of hazardous materials that you don't need or want? It is today, because those prices are never, ever going down.
Great. Thank you. Also, proper inventory, waste management, ventilation, people bringing in
non-approved.
Yeah.
Intro of non-approved. And that, I've got a story that goes along with that.
So many things to talk about. Oh, thank you so much.
Names. Yeah, this is a good list.
Tracking quantities, keeping, yes, up to date with your safety data sheets. And we're going to talk about that because there's some changes underway with your safety data sheets as well. So thank you. And just to keep moving ahead here, our session agenda, we have lots to talk about. So I'm going to start with just highlighting a bit about the occupational disease in Ontario, common chemical related orders that the ministry is giving out. We'll do a review of RACE, process for chemicals. What's health and safety if we don't talk about RACE, and hierarchy of controls. You may have heard of those before. Evaluating controls for that continuous improvement, right? It's never over. We always have something to do. And lastly, ending off with preparing for a potential ministry visit under these campaigns. So occupational disease, and Tova mentioned this in the intro. Why are we even here? Why are we all wanting to make the effort? And here's an updated chart from the WSIB regarding the allowed fatalities over the past several years. So the blue at the bottom is the traumatic fatalities, the gray is occupational disease fatalities, and green is related to COVID fatalities. And also on the ministry's website, they report that occupational diseases are the leading cause of workers' deaths. So exposure to hazardous chemicals in the workplace may result in the worker developing an occupational illness and eventually even causing a fatality. So identifying, assessing, and controlling these exposures, putting in your effort, will definitely help lower the risk, and hopefully you're going to prevent workers from developing occupational disease. So it really was shocking to me when I first saw these statistics from the WSIB, and not only the number of fatalities that occur, but it's actually occupational disease fatalities far outnumbering about 4 to 1 that of traumatic incidents. So, and I think it's because it takes time. It's that longer latency. You don't see it right away, but it is a huge problem. And I'm sure that's why the ministry is focusing on it. So I did ask our provincial occupational hygienist from the ministry what the most common orders that she sees related to chemicals in the workplace. So I put together a little summary for you. So starting at the Occupational Health and Safety Act, as you know, the employer must maintain equipment in good condition. So that's a common order. So for example, if you have forklifts that are emitting too much carbon monoxide, people might be breathing that in. There's also a requirement under Section 54 of the Act to do air sampling to ensure that people are not being overexposed to, there's about over 700 chemicals mentioned in Regulation 833. So that is an order that they will write if they're concerned about exposure levels. Okay. And then moving into the WHMIS regulation, they're ensure all containers entering the workplace are labeled. So they must come in with a label, or if you don't see them with it, you've got to make sure the supplier label's on it, or if it's decanted or the label comes off, making sure it has a workplace label. So when they're walking around, you really want to make sure everything has a label. It should never be uncertain. Requiring for women's training. So this is a big one for their hygiene campaign, right? And don't forget, it's not just generic training, learning the symbols and, precautionary statements. That's important. But don't forget the workplace specific training where you're actually talking and developing safe procedures, work instructions, whatever you want to call it, but you're going to give your workers actual training on how to handle the chemicals they're using, what PPE they need, the instructions, make sure you put this ventilation on, like exact details on how to work safely. And of course, your SDSs, right? Depending on how many you have, this can be a daunting task, but making sure that you have all of them. You have first, starting with your inventory, know what you have. Making sure you have current SDSs for all of them. And workers need to know where they can get them, how to access them. So it can be hard copies, it can be also online or, virtual, that kind of thing, but they need to know and they need to be accessible. And the ministry will be asking that question. Moving on to Regulation 851. It starts out in, Section 130, if you know that regulation offhand, or if you wanted to check. But here it starts, it says, a worker who may be exposed to a chemical agent that may endanger their workers' health or safety, they shall be trained, right, to use and the precautions, the procedures needed to follow for safe handling, use, and storage of that chemical. So making sure they know how to also care for the proper PPE. So not only just giving them the proper PPE, but instruction and training on how to care for it, how to put it on and off properly, how to maintain it or get new equipment. All of those details really are important, right? And definitely emergency procedures. You want to plan for them, practice them, so everybody knows what to do if there is an emergency. And then I just noticing the picture, if you want to put in the chat, what do you think is wrong with this picture? Okay, when you're looking at this picture. And while you're putting in your responses, what do you see happening wrong? I'll just finish off this slide. It also mentions in Regulation 851, where workers required to work with or potentially exposed to a hazardous chemical, you may need to be providing that eye wash facility, emergency showers, antidotes, and of course they need to be clean, accessible, they need to be inspecting them and make sure they're working, all of those good things. And it also mentions in this regulation about no food, drink, or tobacco shall be taken into, left, or consumed in any room, area, or place where any substance that is poisonous by ingestion is exposed. Right, so let's see what you've got. Yes, eating near chemicals, you've got it. Potentially also PPE not being used here. What I was hoping you focused in on, and I wanted to make sure everybody realized this was a picture of a bad example. We've got them eating their sandwich. You've got an open glass cup there, but right in it looks like a shop, right, where their chemicals that are poisonous by ingestion are exposed. So again, how do you know? Maybe put this in the chat. How do you know if your chemicals are poisonous by ingestion? Where are you going to look? Where are you going to find that information? SDS, you've got it for sure. All the information, they can be difficult to read, but they definitely are worth the effort to take the time to read through. Exactly. Thank you. You've got a lot of keen people in the audience today, so thank you. Also, just moving on, Regulation 833, that's a huge regulation about chemicals. It's all about ensuring people are not being overexposed to, there's like 700 listed in there. So when you look at your SDS, there's a section in there that has to tell you what are your hazardous products. And that's where a hygienist would come in. We'd be looking at those and looking up the methods, how we would sample for those. And we would actually come in your workplace, hook a sampling type method badge to collect the air that someone would be breathing in throughout their day. They just work a normal day, and we would send that off to the lab, and we'd get the results and compare them to the occupational exposure limit. So the ministry definitely, when they come into your workplace, if they have concerns of any of these potential hazardous products, they might be asking, have you done exposure assessment? When was it? Can we see the report? Are people being properly protected? And of course, if you are providing respirators, if there's a requirement for development of a proper respirator protection program, should be documented and include all the elements as outlined in the regulation. And one of those things is definitely respirator fit testing. Regulation 490 is all about designated substances. So these are like your really bad offenders for chemicals, and there's 11 of them. So things like silica, isocyanates, lead, all of those things are designated substances. So if you have any of those in your workplace, you automatically need to do a designated substance assessment. The ministry might be asking you for that. So the employer is required to do this assessment in consultation with the committee. And we have templates that we can share with you and talk you through it to tell you how to do it, or we can do it for you, with you, if you're needing help. And if that assessment tells you and you conclude that workers potentially could be exposed and their health could be affected, then you must put in a full control program. And the regulation is very clear about what needs to be in that control program. And it's really all about workers understanding the hazards, wearing the proper PPE, the ventilation, all of those details to work safely with it. And it also includes medical surveillance. Right. And I see Mendoza, Michael has, I think, mentioned in there too about medical surveillance. So the point of that is to be actually monitoring people's health. Could be a chest x-ray, could be blood work, to make sure your health is not being affected by these chemicals. So that's the medical monitoring that happens for that. And we have a whole nother recorded session, Safety Connections, just on that topic as well as respiratory protection program, if you're interested in those as well. So to move on, just wanted to highlight the ministry's occupational hygiene campaigns. There's actually 2, and these are the same as what was happening last year. The first one is the WHMIS training based on the amended hazardous products regulation, Regulation 860. And then the second is really enforcing Regulation 833, which is workers' exposures to chemical agents in the workplace. So again, that's the one that potentially you might need to be doing exposure monitoring of your workers and ensuring you're not overexposing your workers and making sure you're properly protecting them if they're handling these hazardous products. So phase 1 and phase 2 is the education and enforcement phases. They're actually running at the same time because it's continued on since last year. So the ministry is out in enforcement right now. So the hazardous, why are we focusing on, or why is the ministry focusing on WHMIS right now? And well, it's because you've probably heard of the Federal Hazardous Products Regulation, which requires suppliers of hazardous products to provide SDSs and ensure that the containers of the products are properly labeled. So the Hazardous Product Regulation was amended back in December of 2022 to include changes in the hazard classification and information elements in the SDS. So some of those requirements have changed. So there's a 3-year transition period for suppliers to comply with these changes and update their SDSs accordingly to the new classifications. So you may have started to already see the new SDSs coming into your workplace that are now compliant. So once you receive updated SDSs, you are automatically required to retrain your workers in WHMIS. So again, it's a great, the generic WHMIS training will make sure people remember what all the symbols mean, but definitely your workplace specific training where you get into the details of the hazards of the chemicals they're using and how to properly protect themselves and how to handle them safely is what the ministry is also going to be asking you. Have you done both? Are there training records? Tell me, what did you include in your training? So those kind of details are wanting to be, you want to have ready for them. So you're prepared. And most importantly, you're not doing this just to prepare and be, keep the ministry happy. You're doing this to prevent the illnesses or diseases from happening, right? That's the real motivator. And onto the race diagram. How many of you, give me a thumbs up if you've seen this before? Recognize, assess, control, and evaluate. Absolutely. This is our cycle of managing hazards. And Tova, I'm passing it over to you to discuss each of these steps in more detail.
All right, we're talking race. Answering a question in the chat. So we are going to talk about the various race steps, specifically with regard to chemicals. And the first step, of course, is recognizing what your chemicals actually are. And we've had some great conversations actually in the chat that really fall into that recognized step. Conversations about, is this a designated substance? Is it not a designated substance? Those are part of the recognition step. Do you know what's in your cabinet? Some of you said, you know what, I really am not 100% sure, because I have folks that will go to the hardware store and bring stuff in without authorization. And those are issues that can certainly be present. Some of the ways that we recognize our chemical hazards, of course, are those WHMIS elements. There's things like the signal word that you can use to get a better sense of, is this something that is more hazardous, perhaps a little bit less hazardous. Words like warning versus danger. Danger is the worst of the two signal words. So anytime you see danger, you need to have that in the back of your mind saying, or in the front of your mind saying, this is not a chemical that if I had a choice about what I was using, I would be choosing this. If I have the option to choose something that says warning instead, that is going to be a safer choice, because danger is just that much worse. We also want to consider the classifications that we're seeing. And what's interesting is lots of folks will just look at the label and they'll just look at the pictograms and go, okay, pictogram, pictogram, pictogram. I know the hazards of this product. One of the problems is you still kind of don't. When we think about, for instance, the exclamation point, this exclamation point could be a skin sensitizer, it could be an asphyxiant hazard, it could be an irritant. There are so many different types of products that get that one symbol that it's absolutely critical to go into section 2 of your safety data sheet and actually read the hazard statements and read the classifications. Why did the product actually get that symbol on it? When I think about corrosives, is it corrosive to your equipment? Is it corrosive to your skin? Is it corrosive to eyes? There are products that are corrosive to eyes that are not corrosive to anything else. So we really want to get the details right so we understand more about what the particulars are. We also want to consider what other chemical information systems we might be working with. And before we get into that, I will quickly note the difference between health and physical hazard classification and classes. So when we look at the physical hazards group, those are generally products that can cause property damage. So things like fires, explosions. When we think about corrosives, we're thinking about corrosive to our equipment. Health hazards, you'll notice corrosives are there twice, because it can in fact be corrosive to you or your equipment or both. Health hazard group are focused more on the OC disease side of things. which of course includes things that can cause occupational dermatitis, things that can cause lung damage, things that can cause teratogenic effects, which is damaging to an unborn baby. There's so many different types of health effects that we can have, some that are immediate, some that are longer lasting, more chronic, that have a latency time associated with them. And, one of the hard parts about chemicals is we read the safety data sheet and we, think, they say, oh, it can cause kidney damage. And then you use it and you think, well, my kidneys feel fine. Doesn't mean it's not damaging your kidneys. Doesn't mean that you may not discover that it damaged your kidneys 5 or 10 years from now. But the reality is that you need to be very aware of that. Especially if you're someone who already has a kidney disorder, or maybe you have a kidney transplant. If it says nephrotoxic, I might look at that and think to myself, if I don't, but if I was somebody with a kidney transplant, I might look at that and go, yeah, you know what? I really don't want to work with that. Sounds like a bad idea. We also want to think about other types of chemical communication. What are we looking for? TDG labels, transportation of dangerous goods. We're looking at the consumer labels. Some of you are buying products through commercial sources that would have a regular WHMIS label on it. If you are purchasing products that are designed for the consumer market, it's probably going to have those one or more of those 4 symbols that you'll find on the bottom half of this screen. I like to call them, does anyone else, if you grew up in Ontario, don't put it in your face, don't put it in your face, don't stuff in your mouth. If it's not a muffin or a bee. Remember the little blue puppets? If you grew up in the 90s and you were watching YTV, you have seen this ad and you probably have it ingrained into the back of your brain, right? Okay, there are some of us who remember this. And they talked about these symbols. These are products that are designed to be used by consumers at home. Here's the bad part about those labels. They contain almost no safety information at all, aside from the little symbols. And so getting a safety data sheet for this product allows you to get more information about it because the label has very little. There it is. That's the one. By Concerned Children's Advertisers. And every time I reference that, I get people who grew up in Canada are like, oh my God, I remember that. Oh, if that doesn't date me, I don't know what does. What is in your cabinet? You need to have an inventory. And I would start today just looking and going, all right, what have we got? You may not know how long you've had it. Chemicals also don't last forever. We want to take a FIFO approach. For those of you that are working in a commercial kitchen, FIFO stands for first in, first out. We want to use things up before we open a new one. Get a sense of how much of each product you have, where their storage locations are. If you're in a big facility, and Queens Bay Carleton Hospital is a really good example of that, that's a larger type facility. You're going to have chemicals in many different locations, and you may have the same product in many different locations as well. So noting every storage location for that product can help you get a better sense of not only what you have, but where it lives. We also want to get the product names, but also the product manufacturers, because the manufacturer is where that is going to be driving where to get our safety data sheet from. If I have, 10% acetic acid, and that is something that I'm getting from one supplier, I can't then go use a safety data sheet from a different supplier for that product. Maybe I buy it from ABC Chemical and I have a sheet from XYZ Chemical. And you might think, well, it's substantially the same, but you need to keep accurate records, and folks need to be able to connect the label that they see with the sheet that they're going to grab. Yeah, do you need to keep accurate inventory on commercially available products too? Absolutely, Susan. I think you do, because they still do have the same risks. You should still be getting a safety data sheet for them so that you can acquaint your staff with the hazards of the product. They really are not well captured on the labels. And if you don't know what's in your cabinet, you aren't necessarily able to provide adequate protection, adequate storage, or adequate information or training to your staff. And you may be exposing them to things that you're not necessarily aware of. As opposed to symbols, yeah, they can be deceiving. Yeah, bug poison is not labeled as poison because they're not poisonous to humans, which is interesting. Another interesting fact is that they're not labeled as WHMIS labels because pesticide products are exempted from WHMIS. They are covered under the Pesticides Act, not the WHMIS, the Hazardous Products Act that drives all of our WHMIS legislation. So challenging. What do you do if you've got a lot of different stuff? I recommend that you use a barcode system. There are a number of them available. I happen to love, there's ChemBanding, there's Chemscape, there are systems with Sigma Aldrich. If you're in a lab environment, there are a lot of different systems available, but the barcodes ultimately are going to be a game changer for you. It allows you to be able to maintain your inventory. It allows you to be able to sort of check things in, check things out. The lab that I used to work in, we had 20,000 different chemicals just in our lab group. And our lab group was one of 16 lab groups in a single building. How many chemical products did we have in that actual building? 100,000 or more. How do you manage that? Very, very carefully. There are also frequently missed chemicals. Folks forget about the fluids inside of their vehicles. If you've got fleet vehicles, do not forget about these. Or they forget about residues in containers, or containers are still hazardous even when they're empty. We also have fire extinguishers. Those are a chemical. They're a compressed gas. There's also the chemical inside of them. They need a safety data sheet. We forget about 3D printers and all that feedstock. Some places will forget about cleaning agents because they think, oh, they're just from the store, so that they're not a big deal. We don't need to worry about them. There are maintenance shops, there are garages. I mean, back to the cleaning chemicals, just because you bought it at a grocery store doesn't mean that it's not hazardous. All you need to know is that if you mix two different types of toilet bowl cleaner together, one that's based on bleach, one that's based on acid, you could end up like chlorine gassing out your whole facility. This is why it's so important that we don't forget our consumer products, because they still have, in some cases, substantial risks associated with them, especially if they're not used properly. Gas cylinders, we forget about the barbecue on the patio that we use for like staff barbecue Friday. We forget about construction materials and refrigerants in our HVAC equipment. That could also be a fridge in your kitchen, and you think to yourself, but the refrigerant is inside the fridge. That doesn't go outside the fridge, does it, Tova? I say, all it takes is a tiny leak and then your staff are exposed, right? There's landscaping products and quality assurance labs, maintenance and manufacturing facilities. Many of them have QA labs. And yet they'll go spend, $8 million on guarding in their manufacturing facility. And then I'll walk into their QA lab and I'll find unguarded machinery, unlabeled containers, fume hoods that are questionable, like no flammable liquid storage cabinets. And I think to myself, you completely forgot this place existed, didn't you? And they're like, yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's something we sometimes forget. We forget about laundry products and kitchens and washrooms and dish detergent. And there's so many different things. We forget about our shipping and receiving area, which sometimes have chemicals too. And we forget about piping systems because they're just there. Now, from this list, how many of you are now starting to think about at least one hidden chemical in your workplace that you have completely forgotten is there? Okay, a lot of folks. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, right? You're like, I completely forgot about. Like, we don't think about fluids in vehicles. It's one that even right there's the what face. Can you explain more about consumer products? I thought there was a recent update that they did not require workplaces to have SDS as long as they're used in the same manner. Okay, so number 6 is on is a concern. Oh yeah, 3D printers. I think we need an entire safety connection just on 3D printers. Jessica Vieira, ideas. Let's talk a little bit about consumer products. My question to you is, if you don't get a safety data sheet for a consumer product, how are you going to acquaint a worker with the hazards of that product? Because the consumer labels don't provide information about the contents, about the ingredients, They don't provide information about why those symbols were given to that product. They don't provide much, if any, information available about what personal protective equipment to use. In terms of meeting the obligations of the OHSA, it's actually really difficult to do with just a consumer label. That's why the safety data sheets are so important. Yeah, laser printers, the toner is generally considered to be safe. It's just like a carbon black based product. The interesting thing about 3D printers is that there's, you're taking plastic, you're melting it, there are all these filaments, they're a robot, it's moving, there's a lot of different hazards associated with them. Ventilation becomes a hot topic. So yeah, those are all things that we can dig into. What if the company doesn't provide a safety data sheet? So someone had to, nobody hands me a safety data sheet when I put gas in my car. Great question. So every single product that you go to the grocery store or hardware store and buy, someone had to make it, someone had to package it, someone had to distribute it. And those people have safety data sheets for those products. So if I go to, for instance, let's say that I want a safety data sheet for toilet bowl cleaner, Lysol toilet bowl cleaner. Someone had to make it, someone had to pack it, and all of those people have access to a safety data sheet for it. And it is publicly available. Do you really suggest capturing everything? And how do I suggest capturing something and not missing something? The barcodes are one way to do it. You could also be using just label stickers to go and give chemicals a number. That's another way to do it. And if it doesn't have a sticker, it isn't an approved chemical. These can be just little like red stickers you get at the dollar store that look like a mango dabber. There are a lot of different ways you can do this to make it inexpensive, to make it easy, but that's one way we can definitely do this. Can a consumer product meet the definition of a hazardous product if a hazardous product is defined by the HPR? Now, when we look at the HPR, the focus of WHMIS is on products that are being used inside of workplaces. Consumer products are intended to be used by consumers in a more home environment. You can have the same product, and depending on like which filler line it came out of, they're labeled differently. But the product itself is actually the same. And so, yes, you can definitely have products that meet the definition of a hazardous product that end up with a consumer label because it's being sold at Home Depot, but the same product, if it was being shipped to a chemical supplier that was intended to sell to a business, it would have a WHMIS label on it. Yeah, what did I mean about piping and drains? When we think about piping systems, we forget that depending on the type of workplace you're in, there can be chemicals inside of piping systems. So you might have glycol piping systems, you may have natural gas in piping systems. Those are still chemicals, again, that are contained in a piping system that your staff may be exposed to. Yep, did I mean in the building? I did mean in the building. All right, we're going to move on to talk about safety before you buy. Let's say you're buying a new product. What do we want to think about? We want to consider getting that safety data sheet before we purchase the product. Work with your, if you're working with a sales rep, they're usually really happy to go and dig these up for you. Go and take a look and ask, why are we buying this? What are we trying to accomplish? Do we really need to buy it? Maybe, maybe not. Are there benefits? Are there risks? Are we prepared to manage those risks? If it's a hazardous product, are there safer alternatives available? Rather than bringing something in and then dealing with the problem once it's there, that's the point where we want to start thinking about, can we think hard about not buying this? It may be that it is the safer alternative to something you have previously been buying, and that's like a green flag, right? Do we have the knowledge, skills, and equipment internally to deal with this? If it says that you need, to have a spill kit, do you have a spill kit? If it says that you need to be working with it in a well-ventilated area, do you have that ventilation? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, well, using a super product in Orville SDS is not a requirement, but doing your due diligence as MLO can use the general duty clause for not training workers. It just, back to this whole idea of consumer products, it would be extremely difficult to demonstrate that you met the requirements of Section 25(2)D, acquaint a worker and anyone in authority over a worker with the handling, use, storage, of any of those chemical agents that you're working with. I think it would also be very difficult to meet the requirements of Section 42 that talk about training for workers exposed to hazardous materials and hazardous physical agents, and the training requirements found in Regulation 833 if you don't have the information available on which to train someone. And unfortunately, if you've read a consumer product label, it has very little information. I would challenge anyone, and Section 130, absolutely, of industrial establishments. I would really strongly recommend, if you are questioning whether a safety data sheet is valuable for a consumer product, is to go and grab an average consumer product in your house and go and get the safety data sheet for it and compare the information on the sheet to what's on that consumer product label. And I think you would be very surprised. And I think my point will be made. Yeah, it's just really hard to get the information if it's not on the label. Yeah, there were some questions about narcotics. Could we get some examples of what proper workplace label would look like for decanted solvents? Yeah, absolutely. It's got to have, we use NFPA labels. That's a fantastic choice, but I know OHSA, those aren't required. That is true. If it's 3 for red foam, does it have to have a pictogram on it? No, it doesn't. A workplace label has to have 3 things on it. It has to have the product name. It has to have some basic handling precautions. If it's flammable, I would say flammable, keep away from spark and flame. And then it has to have the words CSDS for more info. That's it. That's what a WHMIS compliant label, workplace label, has to have. Do we have the knowledge and skills to use this? Do we have a control plan to communicate and manage risks? Change management. Are we going to engage our change management process? How long is the shelf life? Because chemicals don't last forever. And for those that don't have a particularly long shelf life, don't buy lots of it, because all you're going to do is throw out a bunch. And that's also very expensive. So you buy it, and then you also then throw it out. It's like buying, 80 gallons of milk and you needed like a 4-gallon jug, and that was it, or a 1-gallon jug of milk for the week. And you're like, oh, I bought all this milk. It ages like milk. There's a reason why that is a term. What's the smallest amount we realistically need? And what's the back end of the life cycle? Chemicals only go in 3 places. They either lead in a product you make, they leave in a waste stream, so down the drain, into the air, into your staff, or they're leaving by hazardous waste. There's no way. These don't magically disappear. So it all goes somewhere. For every new product you buy, we want to think before we buy. But what about our existing products? When you do your inventory, be ruthless. We are talking like those jeans that are 2 sizes ago jeans, and you're like, oh, but I might fit into those. Oh, I might still use it. No, you won't. You and I both know that. Chemicals bring out the inner hoarder in everyone I've ever met. My grandmother moved out of her apartment. I found carbon tetrachloride in a little bottle labeled dry cleaning solvent that she bought for under 50 cents from a store that hasn't been in operation since the 60s. Hoarder. So you need to be absolutely honest with yourselves about, do we still use it? If this is a product you are actively using, do we still need it? Why are we keeping this? And if you are, is it past its prime? Is it even still usable? Because it might not be. Are there less hazardous products available to do the same job? If there are, maybe we should be moving toward those alternatives instead. And have there been changes to the Hazardous Products Act that apply? Maybe you find something that has an old WHMIS label kicking around in your, by old, I'm talking about like 1988 old. That's a giant red flag. When is the cheapest time to dispose of this? I posted the slide earlier. It is today. It's never getting cheaper. So if you're holding on to things and hoarding your chemicals because you think that somehow this is saving you money, I guarantee that it is not. You want to be sure that when you are disposing of things, that you're disposing of them properly. Work with a reputable company that manages hazardous waste to be sure that it is in fact going to the right places. So you decided to keep it. What are we going to do? We want to make sure that we review our safety data sheets in detail, review your existing controls. We have had, of course, some changes that Tony was mentioning to the hazardous product regulation. There are some new things that are in our safety data sheets. One of the hot tips to look for a new safety data sheet is to look for the word particle characteristics in the physical and chemical properties. If you see particle characteristics and you see a sheet that was in the 2023, 2024 timeframe, that is the newer sheet. We also want to check if there are exposure limits found in Regulation 833 or in the ACGIH book, which is what we use when we don't have a limit listed in 833, and what kinds of precautions maybe have changed on the safety data sheet. New sheet, new changes. Are there any recommendations for reputable companies for disposal? Yeah, you can hit me up. We can't, WSPS doesn't endorse any particular service, but I would look for environmental disposal. I can certainly pass some names off. Again, we don't endorse any particular product, but there are a number of them across the province. Many of them are fairly large, and they do focus on commercial. So there are quite a number of services available. You're welcome. Yeah, don't just throw them in the trash or let your staff take them home, which is how my dad ended up with a whole garage full of stuff that he literally told me. He's like, don't touch that or you'll die. And I'm like, we also want to look at the chemical properties and the packaging. Why the packaging? Look at your physical states. Is it a solid liquid or a gas? You need to know this. All our dads are like that. I know, right? I have I can do a whole safety connection just with my dad's stories. We also want to look at the chemical properties. I want to know the vapor pressure and density. Does the vapor go up or down? If it goes down, I need to have a little more ventilation to be able to pull it up. And to make sure it gets exhausted properly. What's the flash point? Low numbers are bad. High numbers are better. What point does it melt? If it's like kind of 22, 23 degrees, 25 degrees, you might like look at a bottle and it's a solid one day and a liquid the next. Does it have an odor threshold? Some products you can smell and they're really stinky and not very toxic. Other things are super toxic and you can't smell them. pH, is it acid? Is it a base? Is it neutral? We also want to get a sense of what it can decompose into. Are those hazardous? The packaging, is it under pressure? We want to assess our health hazards. Exposure and toxicity ultimately drive risk. High exposure to something with low toxicity can still equal very large risk. For something like soy sauce is a really good example. If the exposure is really high, if you're a frat boy who drinks an entire liter of soy sauce on a dare, which has happened, you can die from that. It's not very toxic. It's delicious in reasonable quantities, toxicity low, but if the exposure is high enough, it can still kill you. But you also want to pay attention to those products that have really high toxicity or even a really small exposure can have bad news bears type scenarios. Health hazards. Ultimately, consider how much are you using, how we're using it, and in what form. Powders versus pellets. We want to think about spraying versus wiping. This is just creating these clouds of dust, these clouds of mist that are really easy to get into the body. And what are we doing with it? Are we mixing it with things? Are we diluting it? Those are more complex tasks that have additional risks associated with them. What are we going to do if a worker comes in contact with this? Have we considered the emergency response end? How toxic is it? What are the health hazards? Are staff acutely aware of what those are? Yeah, frequency of exposure also increases the risk. Yeah, Kamali, that's a really good point. If you're exposed, once a week versus several times a day, you are ultimately being exposed to a higher quantity. And if your exposures are frequent, it also impairs your body's ability to detoxify this out of your blood because you just keep getting more. I mean, it's the classic example of like, alcohol is a great example. If you start drinking and you just keep drinking, you never ever sober up. You need time for your body to be able to detoxify these. So if you keep getting these frequent exposures, it never really leaves your body. Are there any resources the WSPS provides for incompatible chemicals? I used to from grad school. Ooh, that's a great point. I might have something. I know Tony and I can probably dig up some things. There were, last I looked, 17 to 21 different compatible categories. So yeah, Michael, feel free to reach out to me and we can convene on that. So let's talk. We've talked about recognizing and assessing. We're going to move on to controls. And there's this hierarchy of controls, and we always want to start at the top. When we think about if it's dangerous enough that you don't want it, don't buy it. That is elimination in a nutshell, but we'll dig into these. First is dispose of your products that you don't need. And we've talked a little bit about that. Don't let people take them home. Don't throw them in the trash, and don't pour them down the drain. That's bad for the fish. We do want to think about substitutions. Can we substitute by identifying alternatives? Using a pellet rather than a powder, so you're not getting that giant dust cloud. Using a wipe rather than a spray. Sprays create that mist cloud. If we're using like a wet wipe, that uses the liquid product as opposed to the spray product. Using a mixing station rather than a cartridge reduces the amount of handling that your staff have to do of a concentrated product. The mixing station does the magic. They get the dilute product. It's the right mix every single time. That is a great option for you. You could also choose pre-diluted rather than buying concentrates and diluting them yourself because it eliminates that human error factor. You could choose less volatile versus more volatile products. So look for things that have a lower vapor pressure. We could choose use either non-combustible product or choose combustible over a flammable product. A combustible product generally requires some heat added to be able to get enough vapor for it to be able to flash. If you're dealing with something that's flammable, that has the ability to flash on its own at room temperature. Flash point, anything that is below 37 degrees Celsius is considered flammable. Anything above is considered combustible. You could choose things that aren't on the designated substance list, which is a list of toxic, nasty substances that's further up in the chat. There's 11 things. Someone asked about narcotics. Is it on the list? It's not. You could choose things that aren't irritants or sensitizers, rather than choosing something that is an irritant or a sensitizer. Sensitizers are particularly interesting because people can develop allergies to chemicals that they're working with, and those can be long-term allergies. I'm now allergic to methylene chloride from working with it in the lab. The first couple times I used it, I seemed fine. And then the next time, like my hands all swelled up and I was wearing gloves. Then the next time I used it, my hands got red, my hands swelled, and my arms started getting really itchy. The last time I used methylene chloride, it was when my throat got red and itchy. And I was like, okay, I don't like the direction this is going. I don't think I can use this chemical anymore. And I can't probably ever again. It would be the flash point. Yeah, rather than the freezing point. Freezing point is the point at which something turns from a liquid to being into a solid, as opposed to a flash point at which you have enough. It's the temperature at which you have enough vapor pressure to be able to get enough vapor to be able to flash. By the way, feel free to join us for burning questions. Where we are going to be talking flammable and combustible liquids specifically. It is a great webinar. There's chemical hazard assessment, but yeah, feel free to join us for burning questions. Tony, if you can drop that in the chat, that would be great. It's also a super fun webinar. Feel free to drop this in the chat. I'm going to move forward from the chat question, but if you've had great success with substitution, feel free to drop your substitution success story into the chat so other people can maybe think about making that substitution too. We're going to move on to talk about substitution overall. We want to do a risk assessment before we move into substitution land to check to see if a substitution is possible, but also is this going to have other knock-on effects? Things like having to retool, having to retrain. Is it going to result in changes to our medical monitoring program? Maybe we aren't going to need it anymore. We also want to look at user input, talk to your workers. Some workers are just really reluctant to change, and we want to change their hearts and minds about that a little bit by really explaining why the change is happening. But we also want to consider, as we think about substitution, what are the product hazards of what we just are substituting with? Because we typically are not going for a product with high hazard to no hazard. We're often going for a product that has high hazard to medium or more negligible hazard, but still hazard. And consider buying a small amount. Try it before you buy it. Buy a little bit before you buy the big jug. That way you know whether or not you're going to like it and whether it's going to perform to do the thing that you want. Now, as we move in to talk about engineering controls, the one that I have the most conversations about often is ventilation, but it's not the only example. Your piping systems, even just like a pump to take something out of a drum is a good example of an engineering control. We also want to think about our bonding and grounding, and feel free to join us again for the burning questions to talk more in detail about bonding and grounding. But where you do have engineering controls, keep your documents. That means that you are digging into maintenance records, cleaning records. If you've got a fume hood, you want to be keeping the maintenance records on that fume hood and making sure that it has a warning and alarm system so that if it's not working properly or it's not functioning, your staff are going to be alerted to this hazard. Secondary containment is also something we forget about. What is secondary containment? It can be as simple as a Rubbermaid tote, provided the product is not going to dissolve the Rubbermaid tote, but it could also be like metal trays. It can be spill-containing pallets if you're dealing with something like a drum. The goal of this is to be able to contain the entire contents of the largest container in the grouping. And we obviously want to only group things that are compatible, that are together into a secondary containment device. And it prevents leaks or spills. If something breaks, you have that contained inside the, and I'm going to pick on the Rubbermaid tote, but it's now inside the Rubbermaid tote and it's easy for you to clean up instead of it being all over your flammable liquid storage or cabinet, or now like making its way down to your drain. And then you have a Ministry of Environment release. Secondary containment is your storage spill backup plan. And it can be from just like little leaks, but a little leak can become a big problem if you aren't containing it. We also want to think about incompatibilities around storage. Hands down, one of the biggest mistakes that I see workplaces making, there are two with their flammable liquid storage cabinets in particular. One is thinking it's a chemical cabinet for just anything. No, it's specifically for flammable liquids. And the second is that they often will leave containers open inside those cabinets, which is also a no-go. It's designed to protect closed containers. We want to be sure that we are reading the storage conditions that are listed on the safety data sheet. It may say protect from spark and flame, but it also may say protect from shock. It may say that it's light sensitive. So being sure that we are understanding the totality of what our storage picture is. Don't store your chemicals alphabetically. I know it sounds really convenient, but we want to store them based on compatibility. And store your larger containers, if you're looking at a cabinet, store your larger containers on the bottom and your smaller containers on the top. Part of the reason that we do that is that if a small container lands on a big container, it's not likely to break the container. One of the containers might break, more likely the smaller container. But if you put the big containers on the top and the little containers on the bottom, or they're interspersed and random, the likelihood that you're going to break a container and then need to activate your spill plan is a lot higher. Distribution centers have a hard time storing chemicals in a proper way. Yep. This is where working with a chemist can be really helpful, because when we think about incompatible products, I would want those, and I'm going to pick on you, Pool Chemicals at your local big box distributor warehouse. You want those stored, don't put them side by side in the Pool Chemicals spot. We want to keep them apart. One of our waste carboys just leaked, and thankfully it was fully contained. Chantel! Woo! Secondary containment for the win. Just the bottom of a flammable cabinet need to be empty 2-inch to act as containment. It doesn't need to be empty, but that 2-inch lip is actually designed for containment. What about solid versus liquid chemicals of the same hazard class can be in cabinet if secondary containment is used? Yep, provided they're compatible. I don't see any issue with provided that you're not going to end up with an uncontrolled chemical reaction. I don't see any issue with flammables, with liquids and solids being stored in the same containment spot. The only question would be, do the liquids, for instance, if they're flammable, require a flammable liquid storage cabinet? If they do, I would err on the side of putting those into the cabinet and then storing the solid product somewhere else. That is safe. Do acid and flammable cabinets need to be ventilated? Hot question. No. And in fact, I don't think you should vent them. There's a whole rubric for why. Most of them, when they're vented badly. Most of the time when they are vented, it creates new problems. And if you are having cabinet stench problems, a roll of electrical tape will solve most of your problems. So just tape the little cap to the bottle. Your cabinet stench will be cut by 80 to 90%. Do gas cans need to be stored in a flammable cabinet? If they are in your workplace, yes. What about grounded? I would ground them. They're easier to ground than they are to vent. But no, they don't technically need to be grounded. So let's talk about well ventilated. What does well ventilated ultimately mean? It means that it's adequate to reduce the exposure below the occupational exposure limit. It means that it's powerful enough to extract out any heavier than air stuff, dusts, things like that, and you have to have ambient oxygen to support life. I think that goes without saying. You ultimately are basing this on a hazard-specific assessment, so you may need some hygiene testing. You can bring Tony in to take a look at that. Who needs WHMIS training? Anyone who either works with or may be exposed. This also includes office workers who may be exposed. Yes, even your office staff. And do at-home workers need to be trained? Maybe. Do they go into the office? If they don't, they only ever work from home. Probably not. Putting someone through WHMIS isn't that difficult. We have a whole session coming up on site specific, so feel free to hit us up to get. Do we have an online WHMIS course? I think so. Yes, I'm sure we do. If you want to know more, though, about how to build out a site-specific plan, Tony and I right now are already working on that. What is site-specific WHMIS? It's all about learning the hazards of your actual products and then training your staff with work instructions. It's the handling, it's the use, it's the emergency procedures, it's how to use and put on and take off the PPE. Those are all pieces that are site-specific. Yeah, and we've got some great information online about that. Per fire regulations, public cabinets don't need to be vented. That's true. Yeah, also as your vent system goes down, yeah, always safe to keep them sealed. I agree with you completely, Michael. I don't think they should be vented. I think it creates new problems. Yeah, I don't ever want new problems. I have enough problems. We're already talking about a lot of complexity. You're like, oh no, I need to vent this. I'm like, don't vent this. Just seeing if there are more questions. How about perfumes and mist stored in a warehouse? Perfumes are still flammable. If you're dealing with a large amount, I would still be mindful of that. They are largely alcohol, and well, they're in small containers. The reality is, if all of that perfume went up in flames all at once, it would still be bad. What about storing flammable chemicals on a secondary containment under a racking system on ground level? That's a great question. One of the things we need to be mindful of when we think about storage and warehousing is the fire code in relation to warehousing. And feel free to hit me up. I'm going to do a deeper dive with one of our warehouse specialists and an engineer that looks at fire code. And so, Sherry, send me an email and to tova.larson@wsps.ca and I'll dig up your answer. Always happy to go and do that. Could you share the current guidelines or standards for labeling laboratory sample bottles? It has to have some way of identifying what the sample is. It can have symbols, it can have numbers, it could be an Ellicott number, it could be a sample number, there are a lot of different things that it can include, but it has to have some way of someone from your lab being able to identify what it is. Then it has to have hazardous laboratory sample and contact information. So if some random kid picks it up on the side of the road, they may not know what that multi-ringed thing means, but at least it says hazardous laboratory sample and a phone number to call. Need to have. That make sense? Cool. All right. Do we need to retrain yearly? Not the WHMIS click-through training, but you need to review yearly. You could send a quiz, you could do a site-specific review that focuses more on the products that you have, but you need to consult your Joint Health and Safety Committee yearly on the training for workers for hazardous products. That is a requirement. And for due diligence, I strongly recommend that you do the quiz and then keep the quiz. And if folks are failing the quizzes, yeah, you probably need to retrain them. Can you please share the current guidelines for SDS and confirm that a chemical-specific SDS must be available rather than a generic one? There has never been an allowable for a generic SDS. It is always supposed to be the SDS for the product that you're working with. And that hasn't changed since the WHMIS 1988. It didn't change in 2015, and it hasn't changed since. What is the mandated frequency for WHMIS training? Is it required yearly? You have to review the content yearly, but it doesn't mean that you need to do the whole training yearly. You need to ensure on a yearly basis that your staff still remember the information. Yeah, we do also, we maybe still do have a train the trainer program. What do we do yearly because of the rapid turnaround for samples and solutions that we use? You do your WHMIS yearly. Yeah, and that makes sense. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with doing it yearly, but lots of folks think they need to, even though they don't. Supervisor competence. If your supervisors do not know the hazards of the products their staff are working with, that's a problem. Your supervisors need a deeper dive into WHMIS than just a click through. They need to be able to really know how to read a safety data sheet and take that information and turn it into something that a worker can actually use. Just having access to a safety data sheet is great for a start for a worker, but there are a lot of workers who are going to read this and they are going to just glaze over because it's technical, it's complex. The supervisors need to know how to do that deeper dive, and they need to have enough information about both the hazards and the controls you have in place to be able to acquaint a worker with the risks and how they're going to keep themselves safe. They need to have training on WHMIS, but they also need to have training on the chemical management plan for the workplace, emergency response, their role in the right to know, and the OHSA and the associated regs, including the WHMIS regulation, if they have staff that are working with hazardous products. Because if they don't know what they're talking about, it's really hard to guide a staff person to get it right. And if they don't know the detailed use, handling, storage, and emergency precautions, how on earth are they going to hold your staff accountable to make sure these actually get done? When it comes to managing your documents, your employers must now update labels and safety data sheets as soon as practical when new significant data becomes available. And ding, 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 these changes to the hazardous products regulations do in fact constitute significant information. So going and getting updated safety data sheets as these new labels start to roll out into your workplace, it is absolutely critical. Just getting a safety data sheet and thinking about it as a set and forget it doesn't work. You need to verify, because your suppliers are not proactively sending these to you anymore. They just put them online and leave you responsible. So how do we track this? We track when we got the safety data sheet from the website, and then we go back on typically a yearly basis and check to see that we still have the right sheet, that that's still the most up to date. And track the date on a spreadsheet. That way, if the ministry ever asks, when was the last time you checked to see if this was the most up to date, you can actually tell them, and it demonstrates that you are on top of your game. We talked about consumer products already, so I'm not going to talk too much to that. We also want to maintain that inventory, maintain training records of both the, generic WHMIS and the site-specific elements that you cover. If you have a medical monitoring program, continue to maintain that. Keep your designated substance assessments if you've got those, and be sure that you have written work instructions for the products that your staff are using, so they're not misinterpreted, and so if you ever needed to demonstrate what you're training people to, you can show it. So STS sheets do not need to be physically printed. That is correct. Yep, there was a change to the sections around safety data sheets in section 38 of the OHSA that happened around the change to the new symbols that do allow for electronic. You don't need to print them. Thank goodness, because my old lab, the binders, I think we had an entire wall just to safety data sheet binders. It was unreal. Yeah, and as Tony points out, and I had pointed out earlier on in the session, if you are going electronic, you need to train people on how to find them. How do they go to the website? How do they log into the website? How do they find the exact safety data sheet that they need? You can't just be like, oh, they're online, and then leave people to their own devices. That's not okay. Contractors also bring chemicals into your work sites, and they can be terrifying. Do put it in your contractor language that your contractors are required to remove at their expense all of the products that they bring. Check to see their staff have WHMIS training. Ask about their emergency plans for the chemicals. Also ask if they've had lockout and tagout training. Hot tip on that. We want to clearly establish responsibilities also related to any chemical energy you have in your workplace. And be sure that you are getting a list of the chemicals they're bringing onto your work site so you can assess whether or not you will allow them. Because if they're bringing them, that is an issue. Yeah, printed comes in handy in terms of business continuity. It totally does. And I'm not saying don't print them. Some people choose printed, some people choose electronic. Or they choose both. It really depends on your own workplace, whether you have access to them on a phone, whether you've got data. There's so many different elements there. Yeah, as you mentioned, WHMIS training is not required yearly, but a review is needed. Can you share some practices for completing a review? I totally can. I recommend that there are a couple of different ways to do this. One of them is to just send people a quiz. And if they fail the quiz, they need to take the WHMIS again. The quiz would be basics like, make a workplace label. And if they don't get it right, you probably need to retrain them on that. What does this symbol mean? And if they can't tell you, you need to retrain them. Where is the legislation that must be reviewed annually? Section 42 of the OHSA. Let's talk emergency planning. What do we want to plan for? Spills, fires, human exposures. We want to develop a plan for this. This can include emergency showers, eye wash kits, spill kits, fire extinguishers, escape hoods. There are a lot of different ways this can look. It can be antidotes. It can be flushing fluids. The flushing fluids these days are a substantial improvement over water, and they are allowed now according to the Industrial Establishment Regulation. My apologies. I was trying to mute myself, and instead I turned off my camera. Keep your Canutech contacts handy. What is Canutech? Canutech is Canada's emergency response service for chemicals. It contacts with Transport Canada, but you'll find them on every single safety data sheet. Yeah, as Tony points out, the MLTSD would be asking them, what are the chemicals they're working with, and do you know the hazards of them? If I grab a chemical, obviously food container, don't put chemicals in food containers, by the way. I'm gonna just use my big cup here. If I grab this off the shelf and I hand this to someone and say, do you use this? And I say, oh yeah, all the time. Like, what are the hazards of this? And if it's gasoline and they don't tell you that it's flammable and they shouldn't smoke or use their cell phone around it and not to drink it, I am very worried about your person right now. Those are the kinds of things that the ministry inspectors ask about. And it's also the things that any reasonable supervisor should be able to use their spidey senses for and say, if you don't know that this is flammable, I am scared. I just filled with water. Not flammable. For all of these emergency pieces, your staff also need training. Don't just have a spill kit, train them how to use the spill kit. Don't just show them where the eye wash station is, show them exactly how this works and understand that once you have something in your eyes, this is going to be very hard to do. And you really do need a chemical gatekeeper. So many of you highlighted the issues of we don't know what we have because people bring stuff into the workplace. One of my dad's friends was a bus mechanic, and their rule, and they had it was one of their life-saving rules, like no last chance policy. This was an immediate fireable, and every single staff person signed it. They said, if you go and bring a chemical onto this work site, you will leave with that chemical and all of your stuff and your last paycheck. That's it. Like, we are not messing around. Do not bring stuff into the workplace. Full stop. Have people sign it and then hold people accountable. Make one person responsible for buying your chemicals. Why? Not only can they save you money by buying fewer, larger orders and you save on shipping, but you're going to reduce duplication and waste, and they ultimately are the ones who decide, is this allowed or is it not? And it allows them to be able to go and update your inventory, put a little, whether it's the red sticker with a number on it or whatever you are using to manage your inventory, but they really can make a huge difference to tightening things. And if somebody wants to go and they're like, you know what, I really need to buy brake cleaner, great. Then go to your chemical gatekeeper with your business case. And if they say yes, they can go buy it. Maybe you really need brake cleaner. There's nothing wrong with that. So long as you're getting it through an approved channel, I'm cool with this. Ultimately, this allows you to demonstrate due diligence by really tightening up how you manage your documents and how you manage your chemicals. We also want to keep our families safe. Like, you probably have a scent that makes you think of maybe your dad, maybe it's his cologne from when you were a kid and you'd be like 3 or 4 and you'd come home and you're like, Daddy, you know what smell I associate with my father to this day? It's diesel fuel. My dad's an aircraft mechanic. And instead of showering at work and leaving his uniform at work, he wanted to come home faster to his family. And he would just change out of his work clothes here at home. And all of those chemicals came home to his kids. If you are working with chemicals at work, change out of your street clothes. If they're providing you with a uniform, wear the uniform, shower before you go home, leave the chemicals at work. That way you're not bringing them home to your family. If you absolutely have to wash your work clothes at home, store them in a separate hamper. We want to wash them and then wash your washer, do a full load with detergent before you wash your kids' clothes again. That way you are not contaminating their clothes with your work chemicals and the washer gets cleaned. We really do forget this piece of it, but man, we can't forget that. Ongoing inventory management. Have your chemical gatekeeper to keep that inventory tight. If you are doing hygiene testing, don't do it once, do it regularly every 2 or 3 years to make sure that you're, again, demonstrating that due diligence. we want to consider implementing perhaps even a more comprehensive chemical management system. Chem banding is my favorite, but there are a lot of different ones out there. And these can actually allow you to scale your precautions to the amount that you're using. It does some of the toxicology for you, which is really chef's kiss. Preparing for an ACT hygiene visit. We have a couple of slides left. We've got 3 minutes. Tony, it's all yours. And then we'll be wrapping.
Okay, thanks, Tova. Lots of great information and discussion. And absolutely, if we're running out of time, you please email us. We're happy to connect and answer any questions we weren't able to get to. So I'm going to skip this poll and move right into what to expect during an inspection. Have you ever had a ministry in? We'll do the poll real quick. Oh, well done. But some of you may have had them in, so you know about this, but those that haven't, basically really quick, if the ministry comes in, they're there to enforce the regulations, the act and the regulations. So they have the right to enter. You want to make sure you let them in. They'll introduce themselves and the reason for their visit and ask to have a worker and management representative accompany them on their inspection. So they'll conduct an administrative review. So that would be like looking at your documents. So in terms of chemicals, they might be asking, where are your safety data sheets? Have you done exposure assessments? Can we see what the results were? Your WHMIS training. Where's your training record? What did that WHMIS training entail? So those would be administrative type questions, and they also would do a physical inspection. So walking around, looking at the chemicals you have, is everything labeled properly? And even talking to the workers, asking them and trying to get a sense if they have a good understanding what chemicals they are handling, and do they know how to handle them safely, and do they understand the hazards of working with them? So they can ask you lots of questions, and again, just be open with them. And if they find any contraventions, they would be then putting it in an order. So they're really there just to help prevent injuries and illnesses. And Tova mentioned this really quickly. For around the WHMIS campaign, they will ask about your safety data sheets. And if they have a look and they see in section 9 of the SDS, if it has the R, particle characteristics, that's one of the big changes that is really easy for them to see if the SDS has been updated. So if it does have that, it's been updated because it wasn't there before in the older versions of the HPR requirements. So if they see this, they definitely are going to require that you've done WHMIS training. And again, WHMIS training needs to be specific. So giving those safe work instructions on how to handle those chemicals safely is so important. So they are definitely doing their proactive inspections, determining if retraining on WHMIS is required because you've got the updated SDSs. Do you need to do air sampling? That goes with the chemical exposure. They might be asking if you haven't done it in the past, if they're concerned about exposures to those chemicals. So if you have any questions about air sampling, understanding what hazardous chemicals are in your products, reach out to us. We're here to help you. It's our job, so please don't hesitate. You can connect with your local account manager or us directly as well if you've got questions, but a hygienist can help answer your questions, okay, and understand what it's all about. But again, you got to make sure you're not overexposing people to these hazardous products, right? And doing that, you will be preventing those injuries and illnesses and making sure everybody goes home safe at the end of the day. So really quick, our resources, we have a ton of resources and we're going to be sending you a follow-up email with links. But the big one we did for the tool is our toolkit for the MLAG TSD hygiene campaigns. We did an FAQ document with the Ministry of Labor. So we updated that just a few weeks ago and it is posted on our website. The FAQ, we try to think of every potential question we've had through the last year, and so we did update it. We have a great document on how to read a safety data sheet, try to help you decipher what those are all about, and compliance checklists as well. We have a new virtual session, actually. If you're looking to develop a respiratory protection program or a chemical management program, this is coming up on June 10th. So we have a little flyer, and I will be doing the afternoon session. And so we'll be giving you the templates for respiratory protection program and chemical management. And I'll be walking you through how to highlight and update it for your workplace and give you, it's a great examples of how to write these programs well for you. So please don't hesitate to, if you're looking for those, this might be a great opportunity to get those done. The morning is going to be hazard reporting and heat stress. You don't have to sign up for all of them. 1, 2, 3, or 4. So whatever you need. Okay. And just to end off, we are so excited. Tova and I are part of a team developing a new free half-day workshop for WHMIS training on WHMIS specific training. So employers, health and safety people coming to the session, and we're developing templates and tools to give you the resources to help you build your WHMIS specific training back in your workplace. So that's coming up. We're piloting this summer. So we'll give you more details about that to come. And we do, thanks everyone. We have those generic training as well on our website as before. And our occupational hygiene consulting, just to end off, again, if you need any of those services, please just reach out. So thank you, everyone. It's 12:03, so sorry, we went over a few minutes, but thank you for participating and doing the best you can back in your workplace to prevent those injuries and illnesses. So thank you.